whether the SBI General Counsel is statutorily conflicted, and how Governor Cooper's Chief of Staff and General Counsel became enmeshed in personnel concerns of the Bureau. Any confusion of roles, responsibilities, expectations, and authority within North Carolina's premier law enforcement agency could weaken public trust in the Bureau, which confirms the need for a clearly independent SBI. Without clarification in statute, whoever is nominated to succeed Director Schurmeier after confirmation by the General Assembly would face the same challenges. To that end, the sole focus of this hearing is to address the allegations of interference and intimidation leveled by the Director Schurmeier. The Chair directs members to keep their questions brief and on topic. Due to the limited amount of time for this hearing, we will forgo opening remarks and proceed directly to members' questions. The chairs have made your opening remarks available to the committee members, and they have been posted on our committee website for public review. To begin, I'd like to recognize and thank our Sergeant of Arms and our pages for their service today. Today, our Sergeant of Arms, Mark Douglas in the back, Russell Salisbury on the left, my left, Glenn Wall, and David Layton. Our pages are in the back, and we have, if you will, please stand up when your name is called so we can recognize you. Layla Brown, Anthony Guthrie, and Jason Ventura Cruz. We thank you for being here today and appreciate your service. Ms. Gray, Ms. Jones, Mr. Fletcher, we would like to have all three of you, please. Just raise your right hand if you would. And I will ask you in group and ask you individually to confirm. Do you affirm that your testimony is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Mr. Fletcher, Ms. Jones, and Ms. Gray. I thank you. So let us begin the proceedings. The chair recognizes Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here. I'm going to start, Ms. Gray. I understand you're General Counsel to the SBI.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
Okay. And who do you represent in that capacity? Who is your client?
The SBI is my client.
Okay. And what about the governor? Are you answerable to the governor?
No, ma'am. I am answerable to the SBI, that state agency, and the director of the SBI.
Okay. In a situation, is there been any situation in which you believed you represented the governor?
No, ma'am.
Okay. You told staff at one point, and I'm talking about our legislative staff when you were interviewed, that you were unclear on who you ultimately represent. And did you ever seek advice from the State Bar about that?
Yes, ma'am, I have. And the advice from the State Bar is I represent the SBI, the state agency.
Okay. All right. And I think at one point too, you also told the staff here when they were interviewing you that you didn't know where you would be if the director and the governor were in a disagreement. Is that still the situation?
No, ma'am. I'm clear. My client is the State Bureau of Investigation.
Was there a point at which you weren't sure?
No, ma'am.
Okay. How would, if you heard the SBI was going to be being investigated by the governor, would you alert the director?
Ms. Gray, Ms. Gray, could you move your microphone a little bit closer to you?
Sorry, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. If I had knowledge of something, I would share that with the director.
Okay. At times, did you tell our staff that you believe that the director believed you were in cahoots with the governor and were not adequately representing him?
Unfortunately, because I am a licensed attorney, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from sharing specific information that I have gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI. So therefore, I can't answer any specifics about conversations that I may have had with Director Schurmeier.
Okay. Do you know of any reason he would make some of the statements he made last time believing that you were in cahoots with the governor?
No, ma'am.
You spoke to our staff about your relationship with the director and that you and he had some fundamental disagreements as to who you do represent.
Again, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from disclosing specific information that I have that was gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
So,
Generally, it is not my job to agree with my client. My job is to provide advice to my client so that my client can make the best decision possible.
well, your client is the director and the SBI. Do you see potential conflicts in that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand your question.
If there was supposed to be an investigation into the SBI, who's your client, the director or the SBI in general?
I believe my client is the SBI, the state agency.
And so how does that affect your communications with the director?
It doesn't.
When you were told that there might be an investigation into the SBI from the governor, did you have any discussions with the director about that?
Unfortunately, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from answering specific questions about information that I gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
Well, the director testified that you had a conversation with him about a governor's office staffer and whom you ultimately worked for. Didn't that never happen?
Unfortunately, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from disclosing specific information that I gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
The rules of professional conduct allow you to defend yourself against certain statements. So that's why I'm asking you if you are in direct disagreement with something that the director testified to before this committee.
Upon advice of legal counsel, I've been advised that the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from disclosing specific information that I have gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
But there was a staff member from the governor's office that apparently made some comment to you. That's not your client, are they? The government staff, the governor's staffer?
Representative Stevens, this is a client confidentiality matter, and Rule 1.6 of the Rules of Professional Conduct prohibit me from disclosing any information that I gained during my role as the general counsel to the SBI.
But when you are put into a conflict position, such as you have been, with the director saying one thing, I believe the rules allow you to defend yourself.
Representative Stevens, upon advice of legal counsel, I have been advised that the rules of professional conduct do not allow me to disclose that information that I gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
Okay. In other words,
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question of the chair?
I'm sorry. Yes, Representative Quick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned the time restraints that we have, and in your introduction, you didn't give an outline as to how we would proceed with asking questions from members. Could you clarify that for me?
Absolutely. The chair is going to allow each member 10 minutes for questions uninterrupted, and we will keep track of your individual time. Anytime you don't use, we'll keep track of that so you can come back and follow up if you need to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Stevens, you may continue.
I know this is a very difficult situation. Chair, may I ask this question to you? I know this is a very difficult situation, and it seems as though Attorney Gray is consulting with her attorney. Is there a possibility of having him sit next to her instead of her having to reach back? It would be efficient use of time and also be, yes, please, if that's possible.
The chairs agree that that's permissible.
And I'm just,
Representative Stevens, you may continue now.
thank you. So, Ms. Gray, I think I understand you to say today that you are not going to in any way respond to what the SBI director said about your conflict or potential conflicts that you didn't know who you represented. You don't want to respond to that in any way.
Representative Stevens, I would like to respond to that. Unfortunately, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from sharing any information that I have gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
Have you at any point sought to be released by the director to be able to answer those questions?
No, ma'am.
Because you can get that release, is that correct, if your client agrees?
Representative Stevens, the chair apologizes for the interruption, but it appears that the director's attorney, Chris Swicker, is here. Mr. Swicker, would you like to say something?
Yes, thank you. As Bob's personal attorney, he's willing to waive communications he's had with Mr. Gray through the course of her representation of him, and that's the only privilege that he has. He doesn't have that privilege with the agency.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Dole, you recognize?
so we are now hearing about him waiving his privilege after we have asked for this. That means that these folks are not prepared, cannot respond to this, and we need to close this hearing down because they are entitled to due process just as Schurmeier was and just as we were, and now you're giving them the 9 minutes you gave us when we had this committee meeting last time. I find a lot of fault in this.
Representative Dole, Chair appreciates your opinion. This is not a trial. This is not a court of law. This is simply a hearing, and the truth is going to be the truth regardless how much time you have to prepare for it. So, and they do have their attorneys present, so the chair is going to continue with the hearing. And Representative Stevens, you may continue your line of questioning.
Thank you. Thank you. With that having been said, can you now tell us the kind of communications you had with Schurmeier about conflict of interest?
Unfortunately, Representative Stevens, on the advice of my legal counsel, while Mr. Schwicker and the director can waive their attorney-client privilege, you cannot waive client confidentiality under Rule 1.6. And the information and my responsibility to keep that information confidential pursuant to the rules of professional conduct.
And I think that's where we may have a disagreement with your counsel. I think you could be compelled to testify, but we'll talk about that at a different time. How about your communications with the other two counsels sitting here about what were your obligations to the governor?
Representative Stevens, again, I think Rule 1.6 of the Rules of Professional Conduct would prohibit me from disclosing information, again, that I gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI. However, I can say that frequently employees of state agencies are required and need to communicate with other employees of other state agencies, particularly around matters such as budgeting or litigation. And those conversations, pursuant to my reading of the rules of professional conduct, can be had with the knowledge and permission of my client. And I never knowingly violated the rules of professional conduct.
But your client has said that you may communicate with us, and now you're refusing to answer questions. Is that correct?
Again, that waiver only applies to attorney-client privilege. It doesn't apply to the rule of confidentiality that governs all lawyers actions, in all of their actions.
Representative Stevens, again, upon the advice of counsel, I've been advised that the waiver applies to the attorney-client privilege and not to the rule of confidentiality, Rule 1.6, under the Rules of Professional Conduct, which still prohibits me from disclosing information that I gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
Ms. Jones, did you believe that the SBI General Counsel also worked for the governor?
Thank you for that question, Representative Stevens.
Is your microphone on?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that acknowledgement. I want to thank Chairman Johnson and Warren and all the committee for hearing us. And before I answer that, I want to make sure we remember why we're here. The men and women of the State Bureau of Investigation, both sworn and non-sworn. And I think while we have these good, robust discussions, it should remind us of our purpose and that we should thank the men and women of the SBI for all the things that they do. You know, the SBI agents work alongside your sheriffs, your chiefs. They work with your district attorneys. They work in our communities. You know, they're the ones that investigate officer-involved shootings. They perform background checks. They do so many things to protect our communities. They're there when an officer is killed in the line of duty.
And ma'am, I hate to interrupt you, but we are limited in our time here, and so I would like you to see if you could answer the question of, do you believe that the SBI works directly for the governor?
Well, what I'd like for all of us to do is to give a round of applause to the men and women of the SBI, because I don't think we've given them enough credit.
Ma'am, and we don't do that in this committee. We don't.
You don't acknowledge and thank people for the work they do?
We don't,
Representative
unless the chair
Stevens,
does it.
Representative Stevens, if you allow the chair to interrupt. Ma'am, we respect and highly regard the SBI and all of its members, and we would also respect the fact that this hearing is not about them. They're not on question here. We would, the chairs and I would appreciate it greatly if you would respond to the questions and discontinue any attempts to divert the attention of this hearing.
Sir, I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to divert. Just wanted to make sure that they were acknowledged. Thank you for acknowledging.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe that the SBI General Counsel also works for the governor?
No, ma'am.
Reports to the governor. Okay. But back to Ms. Gray, you told oversight staff that you barely knew Ms. Jones or Mr. Fletcher, and that you don't have any kind of personal relationship with them. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And the same for General Counsel William McKinley.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
So, Ms. Jones, Mr. Fletcher, do you agree with that statement, that y'all are just professional acquaintances and not friends? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So any communication between all of you would be strictly professional as employees of the governor and the SBI director?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall any specific conversations about having the SBI investigated and communicating those to Ms. Gray? You or Mr. Fletcher, either one?
Much like Angel here, one of the things these are personnel discussions, and many of the personnel discussions are privileged. I think Representative Dahl mentioned we asked Director Schurmeier for a waiver so that we could more fully discuss, and declined that waiver. And so I want to be very careful and respect that privilege around his personnel record and the conversations.
Okay. But there was, at some point, the governor's office contacted Ms. Gray about an investigation at the SBI. Is that correct?
I cannot answer that, ma'am.
You have no personal knowledge?
That we contacted
Ms. Gray about an investigation of the SBI, or the SBI director?
Unfortunately, that's personnel information that I'm being told I cannot answer.
I'm asking you about a communication you had with the counsel at SBI. Did you tell her there was an investigation into Schurmeier? That would have been communicated to a third party. Was that what was said?
What I would like to say is basically, and hopefully you read my opening statement because it further explained it. So if I may explain it, and that may help answer this question. serious allegations were brought to the attention of the governor's office. And when those concerns were brought to the office of governor, we had to take those seriously. And what we did at that time was share with Director Schurmeier. That's what you do when allegations come, when personnel and their serious violations, allegations of violations, I want to make clear, came to your attention. We took that information to Director Schurmeier.
And did you ask him to resign? To avoid any further
What we discussed
investigation?
in those conversations is personnel protected.
So you're not disputing the fact that he said he was asked to resign?
What I said was that we can't answer because it was a part of the conversation. And unfortunately, we did not get a waiver to fully discuss this.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Quick. Representative Quick, that was very hard to ascertain with all the interruptions Representative Stevens had. We are keeping track of that. Representative Cunningham is next in the queue once the Chief of Staff Jones has completed her answer. Thank you for following up.
I believe we were waiting on your answer.
Can you restate the question?
So you don't dispute what Director Schurmeier said about being told, resign, or we will do a big investigation, and your company, your group will pay for it? Oh, your microphone.
Thank you. What I said was that I couldn't answer it, which means I don't dispute or affirm.
But you've heard the waiver today by Schurmeier.
I'm not sure exactly what waiver that is. I think we asked in writing for that waiver, and they declined. And so I'm not exactly certain what that waiver meant, and if that was for I think he said it was for the conversations with the attorney-client privilege, but not sure what that meant.
And so I'm assuming the governor's not giving you any kind of waiver of confidentiality today, of any privilege that you have of making some discussions, of answering these
The conversation
allegations.
was with Director Schurmeier and myself.
Sure.
So that's what I'm talking
And you've heard his personal attorney say, we have waived that privilege. You can discuss what's happened. So I'm asking if the governor has offered that same waiver.
Representative Stevens, I'm not sure if you saw, they also wrote a letter saying they declined to waive that privilege. And so, and I'm not sure exactly if he really wants to waive all of Director Schurmeier's rights here. So I think someone made that point earlier.
And all we've asked for, all I've asked for of any of you is a response to what Schurmeier said, which, again, even if we're in confidential communication, I think you have the ability to refute what he says.
What I can say is I dispute his characterization of the conversation.
You don't dispute his conversation, but you dispute his characterization. Am I correct? Is that what you just said?
What I said was he characterized his point of view of the conversation.
Representative Stevens.
I'm through. Thank you.
And the chair apologizes for tolerating the interruptions during your time limit. We will come back to you if you have follow-ups. Just let the chair know. Representative Cunningham, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to direct a couple of these questions back to you. When you did the opening statement, one of the things that you said is that there was a request made by the minority members as well as the majority members to hear these issues that are brought forth by the SBI Director. I would ask you to provide those names to me in writing. Democrats, Republicans, provide that to my office, because I'm very much unaware that any of our members requested to hear on this issue. So I would like that provided to my office. Now,
Representative Cunningham, we don't have to wait that long. Representative Dahl actually made the remarks, and I believe she was sitting about where Representative Cleveland is now when
you're
Director
taking away from my
Schurmeier.
time, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry?
You're taking away from my time.
Oh, I can take care of that for you.
Thank you. May I move forward,
You
sir?
may continue.
Thank you. Director Schurmeier spoke at length about the efforts he had made to increase diversity at the SBI. We would like to request that the director provide the diversity data on the SBI employees from before he was appointed to his position and the most current data of the same type. I request that too, sir. Now,
Representative Cunningham, as the chair's understanding, there's an EOC complaint that is ongoing, and we will not delve into that area while that is still active. We do not want to taint anything in that regard. What we will ask you to do is focus on the purpose of this hearing, which is the allegation of political interference with personnel matters at the SBI, as well as intimidation. Do we have any questions along those lines, ma'am?
Mr. Chair, I do have questions.
Then please continue.
Let me, Mr. Chair, what you have asked us to do on this committee, which I'm not 100% certain of, are the goals of this committee. I haven't seen the written goals of this committee. I haven't seen a mission statement of this committee. I'm just hearing from Director Schurmeier. Now you have them in here that you want us to hear from. What are we supposed to be finding? What are we supposed to be finding? That is an issue with personnel? Those are everyday activities. So you can imagine, I'm frustrated. Now, Ms. Jones and Mr. Fletcher, when did you become aware that there were workplace issues at the SBI, as referenced in the dated letter of April the 6th, 2023?
Thank you, Representative Cunningham. As to when and how we heard of these allegations, we can't talk about. So I can't exactly say when and where we heard them. I think if you read in my opening statement, I did mention that in 2018 there were some concerns with the Alcohol Law Enforcement Division that had been previously housed with the State Bureau of Investigation, and that in 2019 this particular body, the General Assembly, moved the Division of Alcohol Enforcement Division from under the SBI directly to the Department of Public Safety.
Mr. Fletcher, do you have any remarks?
With respect to that question, Representative, and I appreciate the question, I would defer to Chief Jones' answer. I don't have anything to add.
Thank you so much. Ms. Jones, were you ever made aware of complaints during Director Schurmeier's tenure, and can you elaborate in that area at all?
So while as I mentioned before, who made the complaints and what the complaints were, I cannot speak specifically to, but what I will tell you is that serious concerns, allegations were brought to our attention. And when you lead an organization, when you know of an organization, I'm sure you all do this in your own businesses, when allegations of workplace violence come before you, or excuse me, I said violence, violations, workplace violations, I want to make that clear. I did not mean to say violence. Workplace violations come to your attention. It is incumbent of you to take those allegations seriously. If you don't take them seriously, it could end in further lawsuits. It could end in this case, financial liability to the state. And so when those allegations came to the office of the governor, we had to take those allegations seriously. And at that time, we discussed them with Director Schurmeier.
Thank you so much. Ms. Jones and Mr. Fletcher, in an ordinary circumstance, would the governor be coming to the General Assembly over a personnel issue? Would you think that is the norm?
I think, Representative Cunningham, what we can say is that in state government, in local government, in private businesses, in all aspects where you have employees, there are going to be allegations of workplace violations, workplace harassment, all types of things. And in a lot of agencies where there's oversight and accountability, there are processes in place to handle those types of complaints. There's a whole chapter in our general statutes about how these things are to be handled. So it is not uncommon for allegations to come up. What we ask and we expect of all state agencies is that you take them seriously, that you think about the men and women who work for state government and you protect them and take these allegations serious. So it's not that they come up, it's how you handle them when they do come up.
Thank you. Mr. Fletcher.
Again, I think Chief Jones has answered the question fully and well.
Thank you. I only have 2 more to go. How would you describe your relationship with Director Schurmeier?
I think also, again, if I'd been able to read my testimony, I would have talked about how we work collaboratively. I had the opportunity to meet Director Schurmeier when I took this position in 2017. We decided and agreed that we would work collaboratively for the mission of the Bureau, and that's what we've done. You know, Director Schurmeier would ask me to support his request in the governor's budget. Director Schurmeier would ask me to support if he needed some assistance from the Department of Public Safety, and I would always be there to assist Director Schurmeier. Likewise, I would ask Director Schurmeier, hey, Director Schurmeier, you know, it seems to be an uptick in law enforcement harm, things happening in law enforcement. What recommendations would you have? What do you see? What else can we do? Director Schurmeier and I worked collaboratively over the course of since 2017 when I took this office. So we have worked collaboratively not only in the past and continue to work collaboratively. Things happen every day, and Director Schurmeier knows he has my support.
I would just add that I've had quite limited interactions with Director Schurmeier, and I view it as part of my job to support all state agencies, and I think we all work for the state. I wholeheartedly agree with Chief Jones about the importance of the mission of the SBI and want to support them like all state agencies.
Thank you. So, did the governor's office tell Director Schurmeier to offer his resignation? And before you answer that, I want to go to another part, because was it also that decision shifted back to offer him to go ahead and stay on board?
So the discussions that Director Schurmeier had, that he and I had, are personnel protected, and I can't discuss those.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to make my final comments because I'm going to move on. When the people testify in reference to leadership, and the Director Schurmeier is considered leadership of the agency, and when the director is the leader, there's a total reflection on the entire department. It's a trickle down, it's not a trickle up. If he is running and operating his agency and there's an issue at the top, there's usually going to be an issue trickling down to the bottom. And so I get it. I get it, because I've worked in corporate America and I've also been a business owner myself. But when you start saying that the people down here are not impacted by the leadership, that is totally inaccurate. So whatever issues that are brought before the committee, I don't have a problem with looking at an issue when it is really something that we can do something about, and when we can really get the full information on the issue. All we're going to be able to hear is this story, that story. We don't have no facts. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Representative Cunningham, does that conclude your remarks? You still have a little over 2 minutes remaining if you'd like to use it later. Now, in response to your earlier question, from the transcript of the last committee meeting in which we heard from Director Schurmeier, you were quoted as saying, "Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're hearing the testimony of the director. Will there also be testimony coming forward from the governor's office to this committee?" Thank you. Representative Chesser, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple questions, if you guys can bear with me. I'm going to jump around a little bit here. I want to open with a couple statements. First, I appreciate Mrs. Jones's comments about the SBI and why we're here and the reason we're here. And I think the reason we're here is to investigate what an independent agency actually looks like and who has oversight over that and how much pressure can be exerted upon them. And so getting to the truth of that is why we are here. And I think Director Schurmeier, if he were here, would probably disagree with your statement. I think his testimony disagrees with your statement that Director Schurmeier knows he has my support. That's a direct quote of what you just said. His testimony flies in the face of that. So I would just caution you about speaking for others before the committee. Now, moving into a brief line of questioning, if I may, for Mrs. Jones, Mr. Fletcher, whichever one of you would choose to answer. Well, actually, we'll just direct it to Mrs. Jones if that's appropriate, because in your letter, you mentioned a meeting with Director Schurmeier. Is this the October 3rd meeting that you were mentioning in your letter?
I'm not sure specific where you're talking about in the letter, but we did have a meeting.
On October 3rd?
I don't remember the dates off the top of my head, but probably about so,
Seems
sir.
about that timeline? Okay. And with the meeting in that director, did you happen to communicate with Mrs. Gray prior to that meeting that that meeting was going to occur?
Whether she was sent an invite, I don't know what you're asking.
Did you reach out to the director's general counsel before scheduling the meeting?
I don't recall reaching out.
Would it be appropriate for you to reach out to the general counsel or the director before scheduling a meeting to discuss personnel issues?
I usually reached out to director and allowed him to bring who he would like to bring with him to the meeting.
Okay, so you don't recall whether or not you made Ms. Gray, Ms. Gray aware of the meeting or the nature of the meeting?
I don't recall specifically that meeting. As you can imagine, I have a lot of meetings and can't necessarily remember
If I
exactly
may,
the
quick
order
redirect. Mrs. Gray, were you made aware of the meeting prior to the meeting?
No, sir, not that I can recall.
So you were not informed that there would be a meeting between the general counsel and the chief of staff of the governor's office and your client?
No, sir, not that I can recall. Not that particular meeting on
I'm going to also assume you
October
did not
3rd.
show up for said meeting.
I did not know about said meeting.
Agreed. All right. Is there any reason why you would or wouldn't communicate with Ms. Gray on an SBI personnel matter?
I would usually talk to the leader of the agency and Director Schurmeier.
Okay. And so when I believe a response that Mrs. Gray gave to staff previously said that communication on such matters would be inappropriate.
I don't recall that specific communication.
Okay. Would you consider that contact inappropriate at this time?
I think, are you asking hypothetically or if it actually happened?
No, I'm saying if the governor's office wanted to interfere in personnel matters to an independent agency, would you consider that inappropriate behavior?
I think interference, no.
Would it be appropriate?
No.
It would not be appropriate. Thank you.
It's interference.
And Mrs. Jones, would you agree with that?
I did not interfere. What I did is
I didn't ask, I said, would you agree with the statement that that would be inappropriate?
What I've done, what I've mentioned before is I would have, as I learned of these information, I would take it to Director Schurmeier, and so I would communicate with Director Schurmeier.
Reclaiming my time. Did you or Eric Fletcher brief the governor on the series of meetings that you had with the director in 2022?
Sir, as my role as Chief of Staff to the Office of the Governor, I often share at high level information with the governor about things that are happening in agencies. As you can imagine, lots of things are happening in North Carolina, natural disaster,
Reclaiming my
fires,
time.
all those types of things.
Ma'am,
And
would
so
you answer the question, did you brief the governor on this specific issue? Yes
he was
or no?
made aware of
The governor
personnel
was aware
issues.
that there was a complaint against the director of the SBI.
He was made aware of the allegations and concerns at the SBI and personnel, yes, sir.
Okay, so following the director's testimony before this committee, your office told news outlets that the SBI has the independence to manage its own workforce. Is that correct?
You recall that. I'm not the person that talks to the press, but if that's what you say, it's it.
So
You're quoting something
Yes,
that I
ma'am,
don't
I
have
am.
in front of me. So that's what I'm saying. I
Yes,
don't
ma'am, I
have it
am.
in front of me.
Okay, so how would you define independence?
Independence?
Yes.
Independent to make its own decisions as an agency. And sir, as you mentioned, I'd like to kind of also talk about directors.
No, ma'am,
Schurmeier's
this is
testimony.
going to be my time, so we're going to stay on my topics, please.
I would like to, yes, sir. Okay?
So, has the governor's office or the Department of Public Safety ever consulted with the director on personnel hires?
As I mentioned before, when these serious concerns and allegations came to office, I talked to Director Schurmeier.
And we're not talking about the concerns, I'm talking about hiring practices.
We've had lots of personnel discussions. A lot of personnel discussions include hiring. As you know, recently has been a great resignation in the recruitment and retention of law enforcement officers and all those types of things. So lots of people are having lots of discussions around hiring right now.
Okay, do you recall any of those specific positions that maybe the discussions occurred about?
No, don't recall, can't discuss any specific, but always talk about hiring practices, promotional opportunities, training and continuing education and those types of things in personnel matters.
But it's not your personnel and it's not under executive privilege because the governor's not directly involved in an independent agency. So why would that be privileged?
Sir, as I mentioned before, when this information came to me, I shared it with Director Schurmeier.
But I'm asking about positions that the governor's office inserted themselves in the hiring practice.
That's your characterization.
So you guys have not influenced hiring practices within the SBI.
Sir, if I may refer back to Director Schurmeier's testimony, where he talked about several times how he was able to promote, how he was able to hire. I think he even talked about one time he decided not to. I think in one of his statements, he said, I promoted, I did this. I think...
Thank you. If you read just a little bit further in that testimony, you'll also find where he said that the governor blocked him from hiring someone. They drug their feet until they lost him, or they denied his ability to remove staff and also hire the candidate that he wanted.
I think you also see where Director Schurmeier
Reclaiming
says,
my time?
well,
Have
actually,
you or anyone from the governor's
I do
office
have
or
that
the
authority.
ma'am? Reclaiming my time. Thank you. Have you or anyone from the governor's office or Department of Public Safety ever delayed in giving approval to such a candidate that was presented to you by the director?
As I mentioned to you, when these allegations came, we would talk to Director Schurmeier, and one of the things we would talk about is his clear ability to make these decisions. Sometimes he would say he chose not to go down the directions. He would take into account the ramifications of his decisions.
But was one of his candidates ever delayed?
I don't know what you mean by delayed, sir.
Well, in his testimony that you're thumbing through there, he mentions a particular candidate that was delayed to the point that he lost his applicant.
He also talked about his ability that he had the authority to hire and those types of things.
Thank you, ma'am. Redirect over here to Ms. Gray, if you will. Director Schurmeier mentioned an allegation of discrimination last year. You don't have to waive any of that. He mentioned that in his testimony. As SBI General Counsel, did you provide legal advice or representation in those matters?
So I think generally, yes. I cannot, again, reveal the specifics of those.
I didn't ask a specific, but yes, ma'am. As General Counsel, how many EEOC complaints have you defended since the director has been in charge? Not asking the characterization of the complaints, just the quantity.
And again, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from answering that question and disclosing information that I gained in my role as general counsel.
Has that information been disclosed to the governor's office?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. How many of the complaints, in a general sense, is the governor's office directly involved in?
Again, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from disclosing information that was gained in my role as a general counsel to the State Bureau of Investigation.
Makes it difficult for us to get to the truth when we have conflicting stories on printed testimony and then we can't ask questions here. Can you explain the process of how these kinds of complaints are filed within the SBI?
So, are you talking about EEO complaints?
Sure.
Okay. So those are not filed.
Well, I
There are some
understand
that
those
are filed
federally.
within the Bureau. So if it's an internal complaint, there is a team from the Department of Public Safety that investigates those, and those findings are shared with Director Schurmeier. Outside EEO complaints are filed with the EEO Commission. In general, once those complaints are filed, the SBI will receive a notice of charge that a complaint has been filed, and we are given a time frame to respond to it, to file a written response. In general, I will work with the staff at the SBI and the director to compile the information necessary to respond to the complaint. I will draft the response. That goes to Director Schurmeier to review and have final approval, and then that gets filed, and then we wait for EEOC to investigate further, close out, whatever they're going to do with it.
Okay. And just to continue on this vein, in another hypothetical situation, how would you handle being named as a witness in a complaint against the SBI?
If I am named as a witness in a complaint against the SBI, I think my limitations, again, from the rules of professional conduct would prohibit me from sharing information without the permission of the director of the SBI.
I'm not sure you follow my question.
Maybe not, I'm sorry.
In the service you provide to the SBI and to the director, how would you proceed if you yourself, as general counsel, were named as a witness in a complaint?
So if I'm a witness, then I am I think, conflicted out from representing the SBI, and we would find external counsel or different counsel to represent the SBI.
And so you would have to recuse yourself. Would you have to notify your client of the conflict?
Yes.
So it would not be appropriate for you to continue on as counsel?
Not if I am named as a witness, no.
Did you happen to have the opportunity to attend any meetings between DPS and the governor's office or the SBI working through any of these personnel issues?
So again, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from discussing specifics of information that I gained in my role as general counsel. However, I can say that I did attend meetings in my role as general counsel to discuss various matters.
Okay. And are these the only meetings you attended where DPS and the governor's staff were present?
Again, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from providing information that I gained in my role as general counsel to the SBI.
I'm not talking about information. I'm talking about who was present in the room.
Representative Chesser.
Yes, sir.
Chair apologizes for the interruption, but your time has expired. We will be glad to come back to you for any follow-up questions that you have. Representative Quick, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I want to thank you, first of all, for attempting to set the atmosphere for this proceeding in stating that it was not a trial or anything of that nature. So to you three, first of all, I thank you for taking the time to be here today. I promise to you I will not be discourteous to you in any way. I will ask you a question and allow you to answer the question. For as my understanding is, we're not here to have gotcha moments, but we're here to gather information so that we can proceed with whatever this committee is going to do, whatever that is. And I thank you again for being here. To Chief of Staff Jones, I thank you. I know that in our professional correspondence that you have always been very helpful and assisting, not only to the residents of District 58 that I represent, but into the entire state. I thank you for your 25 years of service in state government, and knowing that it has not been easy for you to get to where you are over 25 years of state government, and I appreciate the fact that you serve our governor so ably, and I appreciate that. Attorney Fletcher, I have not had the experience of working with you very often. However, your reputation precedes you as being fair and honest, and I appreciate you being here today. And Attorney Gray, I thank you very much for taking the time to be here today and for maintaining professional standards. That is very important. I'm a pastor, and I know that sometimes what you share with someone in confidence is not only should it be policy, but it also should be a matter of personal ethics to be able to have people to rely on what you say to them being kept confidential. But that's a little different for you and me. You have professional standards, and I thank you for upholding those standards here today. My questions are, earlier it was said by another representative that you're not to speak for others. That baffled me a little bit, because when I was here on the 28th, that's exactly what Director Schurmeier did. He sat there and said to us what other people said and shared details of a conversation with us. So I think he spoke for others. Thank you for maintaining confidentiality as best you can. Attorney Fletcher or Chief Jones, has the governor's office directed the SBI or Director Schurmeier to make personnel decisions?
Thank you, Representative Quick. The governor's office, as I've mentioned, when these allegations came into the governor's office, we went back to the SBI director, shared that information with him, and always made it clear to him that the decision was his to make.
Thank you for that. And Attorney Gray, I have a few questions for you. I'm going from my memory, I think the last comments I made when Director Schurmeier was here was that this sounded more like a personal rather than personnel situation. You hear the difference in those two terms. How would you characterize your relationship with Director Schurmeier for the past 7 years?
Unfortunately, Representative, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from disclosing any information that I gained during my role as general counsel to the SBI.
Thank you. Over the last 7 years, would you say that Director Schurmeier has done any good things for the SBI?
Representative Quick, unfortunately, again, the rules of professional conduct prohibit me from disclosing any information that I gained during my role as the general counsel to the SBI.
Thank you very much. I don't have any other, yes.
I do want to proactively say that Director Schurmeier has done good work for the SBI. The beta program that we have in North Carolina and some of the other programs that he has started are highly recognized, and I don't want to go and miss this opportunity, since you asked this question, to acknowledge the good work that he has done in his role as SBI Director.
I appreciate that. And again, thank all three of you for being here and for your testimony and for your willingness to sit through this hearing that we have had that has kind of taken on the tone and tenor of a trial sometimes, and hopefully that you will, if we need you back, that you will agree to come back, and we'll be nice. Thank you.
Representative Quick, you have approximately 5 minutes remaining. We can come back to you if you have any follow-up questions.
No, sir.
Representative Johnson, you were next in the queue. Are you prepared, or would you like to?
I'm always prepared.
That's frightening.
Yeah. Thank you both, all three, so much for being here. And I think between the three of you have at least 3 more law degrees than I do. So I'm going to try to keep this very conversational, and some of it will be a repeat of what we've already touched on. And then we'll also try to get a little bit more into these conversations. You had stated you met with the director in late 2022. I believe it was October 3rd, that first meeting, but late 2022, to discuss these issues. What prompted that first meeting? What was the original prompt to ask for that first meeting, and who asked for the meeting?
So while I can't discuss, what I would just continue to reiterate is when allegations were brought to our attention, we wanted to take that information to Director Schurmeier.
Were there meetings after that first October 3rd meeting? Were there subsequent meetings after that?
Yes, sir. There were meetings, and yes, sir.
Do you remember how many meetings in total there were?
No, I think we might have talked. I think Director Schurmeier might have talked about the number of meetings, but
And can you mention who all was present during those meetings? Not the content, but who was present during those meetings?
So in many of the meetings, as I mentioned, I talked to Director Schurmeier and I told him and said, I'd like to meet with you. He had the opportunity to bring who he would want, and so it would be at different times, different people in those meetings.
And just to clarify, when you had communications with SBI, it was through Director Schurmeier, correct? Thank you. And I know I had some questions here about what was the topic of discussion. We pretty well covered that. If the basis of the meeting was the EOC complaint, was there a point, and I don't know the timeline of it, was the EOC complaint concluded before that meeting or after, or was it in the middle of the complaint? Where was that?
So, sir, you specifically say, I'm not stating that it was about the EEOC complaint. I am not allowed to talk about any of those issues. Those are personnel protected. So I can't respond to that. What I can say, in a lot of our meetings, we talked about, personnel actions and the importance of personnel actions and the implications or the ramification on those personnel actions on the Bureau, all the things that go with personnel, recruitment, retention, new academies, all of those type of personnel things.
Okay. And this is